This is Bethlehem Royal Hospital, formerly known as St. Mary Bethlehem and best known as Bedlam. Founded in 1247, Bedlam was established to provide relief to crusaders, specifically those living in poverty. By the late 14th century, records show it began admitting patients with mental disorders, signaling its gradual conversion into an asylum, with a report from 1403 indicating that Bedlam housed 6 men deemed to be insane. To this day, it remains the oldest active psychiatric institution. Over time though, the hospital's name began to be used to describe chaos, confusion, and insanity. Insanity has always lived in the space between fear and fascination. For centuries, Bedlam's doors were open for the public to visit. Complete strangers were allowed inside, turning the hospital into a grim spectacle where patients were observed like curiosities. Where Bedlam showcased the absence of control, speedrunning displays its pinnacle, a total understanding of the inner workings that the game never intended to reveal. Insanity extends beyond just being defined simply by behavior, but rather by a defiance of what's considered normal. Even as the line shifts, the idea of madness continues to entrance us. It endures as a symbol of the extraordinary, being pushed beyond conventional limits. What makes speedrunning compelling isn't just the speed, it's the story behind it. The ones willing to push further, retry longer, analyze deeper. There's something almost paradoxical in speedrunning. It shows how control can resemble chaos and how repetition can breed revelation. In the pursuit of perfection, the requirements often resemble madness. This is the insanity of speedrunning. But you know what else is insane? When YouTubers take forever trying to convince you to subscribe, hit the bell, like the video, leave a comment, send it to a friend, share it with your grandmother, contribute to the hype campaign. This is a speedrunning video after all, and I'm trying to save time. So let's just skip to convincing you to subscribe. WarioWare has long been one of Nintendo's most innovative franchises. Rather than one truly coherent title, each entry into the WarioWare series is a collection of microgames. Most of these microgames last no more than a few seconds, with players being thrown into each with minimal instructions and still being required to figure out the objective instantly. To put it bluntly, the series can be rather jarring. Oftentimes, the games are chaotic and random. The art style is deliberately bizarre, ranging from crude doodles to outright parroting Nintendo's own titles. Both in terms of tone and gameplay, it easily stands apart from nearly every other release Nintendo has put out, and especially in its early days, the series was among the most critically acclaimed in all of gaming. Even with this reputation for quirky innovation, WarioWare Twisted is without a doubt one of the weirdest games and one of gaming's weirdest franchises. Released on the Game Boy Advance in 2004, the game was highly innovative due to its cartridge being designed with a built-in gyro sensor. A gyro sensor is a device that measures orientation or angular velocity, detecting how quickly and in what direction something is being rotated. By being built into the cartridge, the game was able to react to players moving the Game Boy around, with much of the gameplay being built around this mechanic. In the days before the Wii and the Switch, motion controls like this were virtually unheard of, making WarioWare Twisted incredibly unique for its time. As speedrunning has become more popular, nearly every mainline Nintendo franchise has seen massive communities form around them. WarioWare is an exception to this. Anyone who remembers Bandicam watermarks or camcorders pointed at TVs knows how difficult recording video game footage used to be. Especially in the early days of speedrunning, handheld speedrunning was especially hard to film due to the lack of affordable and readily available capture cards. For most, this meant not speedrunning handheld games, while the especially dedicated would point a camera at their hands and try not to move too much. For a game built around twirling your console around though, try not to move too much wasn't really much of an option. As a result, Twisted never became the next big thing. That didn't stop it from being one of the most interesting though. The highlight of the run is Jimmy T's boss stage. The player is supposed to walk up a staircase by rotating the Game Boy. Most stairs are completely safe, but a few have cracks and will break if the player stands on them too long. Near the top is a stair that opens and closes on a set cycle of roughly 2 seconds. This cycle proved to be a bottleneck in the level. The faster the player turns the Game Boy, the quicker they go up the stairs. But it'll only save time if they can reach the trap stair soon enough to make an earlier cycle. Reaching the top takes just around 1 full rotation of the Game Boy, and there's only so fast a person can spin something while retaining control. Of course, you could just lose control. Worcester is one of the most iconic speedrunners ever. A longtime titan in Pokemon speedrunning, he was also the first person to run WarioWare Twisted. After losing the record for the first time ever to a runner named Pandemonium, Worcester would come storming back with a new strategy on the stairs. The level starts, and within half a second, Worcester has reached the top. A look at his face cam shows him sit up before the level starts, before a sudden jerk off camera. A run he did at Australian Speedruns Marathon in 2019 gives a better view of what was going on. Right as the level starts, Worcester throws his DS in the air, where it rises up and performs a 900 before landing back in Worcester's hand. As you can imagine, there are many ways this trick can go wrong. Beyond the obvious risk of breaking the console, the trick also had the chance to crash the run. This happened earlier in Worcester's marathon run. Worcester threw the DS into the air, the game crashed, and Worcester was forced to redo the entirety of Jimmy T's level, costing over 2 minutes. It's also possible to fail the trick another way. Despite how fast the player is moving, they can still fall when they reach the trapdoor stair, and given how the console is currently in mid-air, there's no way to react even if the runner can tell that they have a bad setup. Now, this trick is already rather absurd, but what if we dialed it up a notch? A few months after the GameCube was released, Nintendo began to sell GameCube Game Boy linking cables, which allowed for some GBA games to be played through a GameCube. A list of compatible games can be found on Wikipedia, and even includes a few WarioWare titles, though Twisted is notably absent. A few years later though, Nintendo came out with the Game Boy Player. With this attachment, GBA games would plug directly into the GameCube, and since the gyro sensor was built into the Twisted's cartridge, some gears began turning. The world record is currently held by a runner named Bomb Bomb. The run starts with Bomb Bomb sitting with 2 controllers on his desk and the GameCube in his lap, and 2 spare consoles in the background. For most of the run, Bomb Bomb alternates between tilting his GameCube and using his wired controller. Once he reaches Jimmy's level though, he uses the downtime between games to switch to the wireless controller. It becomes readily apparent why he does this once he reaches the boss stage. As the level starts, Bomb Bomb prepares to throw. When he does, you can see cords whip around his setup as the character bounds up the stairs. He lands the trick perfectly. For good measure, Bomb Bomb ran Twisted at RTA in Japan in 2023. This angle is arguably more impressive. While throwing the GameCube, Bomb Bomb is fully looking at the screen. It's only once he's beaten the level that he looks down, almost surprised to see the console in his hands and in one piece. The wild spectacle of throwing a GameCube for a few seconds on a timer demonstrates a willingness to embrace the absurd. It was already crazy when Worcester was throwing a DS, but in doing so, he set a standard. When GameCube proved optimal, the trick became even more outlandish, but world records aren't set by playing it safe. Sometimes, it requires being a little insane. Instead of hardware risks though, what if the insanity is scaled down to something much less noticeable? After all, the cost of dropping the console is self-evidently high, but never guaranteed to be paid. What if instead the cost was low, but unavoidable? The standard user sees a phone screen as a temporary distraction, a time killer of the truly bored or the blissfully uncommitted. Many of these games though are structurally cynical and inherently predatory. They're built upon exploitative microtransactions and a randomized design meant to frustrate the user into paying. Temple Run was one of the first mobile games to take the world by storm, and it's no exception to this exploitation. The game is an endless runner. Normally, these are not well equipped for speedrunning due to the lack of a clearly defined goal, but a community has formed around who can reach 10,000 meters the fastest. The game has several power-ups, with the most important ones being the boost and invincibility. Both can be upgraded 5 times, with the max boost costing the player to run 750 meters at top speed without being able to die, while a maxed invincibility lasts around 2,000 meters, but still requires a runner to control the player. Both of these power-ups require a runner to spend coins, but since they're one-time purchases, this is a grindable investment. The real insanity of speedrunning Temple Run comes from using utilities, specifically the Mega Boost. Mega Boosts cause the player to run 2,500 meters at full speed and completely controlled by the computer, making them absolutely essential to world record attempts. The issue is that they cost 10,000 coins. The most effective way of buying coins is $20 for 200,000 coins, meaning that each attempt costs $1. The importance of the Mega Boost has only become more important as the community developed, as a means of preserving its speed was discovered. By continually jumping or sliding before the boost ends, the player won't slow down, meaning that if a human was able to react in time and had good terrain generation, they'd be able to chain the speed boost all the way to 10,000 meters and achieve an unbeatable time. While this strategy has serious viability issues, a similar strategy can be performed if an invincibility power-up spawns before the 2,500 meter mark, as obtaining it before the Mega Boost has finished causes the game to continue controlling the player. While this doesn't perfectly preserve max speed, it is significantly more controllable. Now, the issue is getting the proper power-up balance. An optimal run starts with using the Mega Boost, before getting invincibility around 2,500 meters and a second around 5,000 meters, then 2 more boosts before the end of the run. The most notable person to run this category is YouTuber Easy Speezy. He spent over $100 trying to achieve a perfect run, with none of these attempts getting all 4 power-ups. After pivoting to more affordable means of obtaining coins, Easy Speezy did hundreds of more attempts and still never got the right combination. In the end, he changed his strategy and began accepting less than perfection. This eventually culminated in a world record time of 1 minute and 33 seconds after what would have cost over $500. Easy Speezy doing this is hardly the most insane part of the story though. After all, he's a YouTuber who turned this expense into content. Those $500 turned into a video which received millions of views and likely generated thousands in revenue. No, the craziest thing is that someone ended up beating his time. Inspired after seeing the video, a runner by the name of ThatGamerCJ created an account on speedrun.com and started submitting runs. After a few days of attempts, CJ got a run with no deaths, lowering the record to a 1:17, 16 seconds faster than Easy Speezy. This then is an ultimate absurdity. A game designed to leverage human boredom and exploit impulse spending. Were CJ to buy the coins he used, the run came with the exact same price tag. Mega boost to start each run, a $1 exchange for 10,000 coins. With such horrible odds at perfection and a cost to play, speedrunning Temple Run is hardly anything more than a slot machine. It's an addiction to chance and chasing losses, all while accumulating losses in the hopes of finally cashing in. Yet, in the relentless pursuit of that perfect, elusive score, speedrunners prove just how compelling the illusion of control becomes in the face of sheer insanity. But what happens when the relentless pursuit of speed shaves off every dollar, every second, and ultimately every frame? The stakes shift from an endless gamble on random power-ups to something more hardwired. The financial costs vanish, replaced by a speed so great that it threatens to break the very concept of what a run is, leading us to one of the fastest yet strangest world records in all of gaming. What's the shortest speedrun you can think of? For some, it may be Super Mario Bros. Being beaten in 4 minutes 54 seconds. Others may think of runners finishing Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy in 58 seconds. Maybe it's solving Clue in less than a second. What if I told you that it gets even faster? In 1986, Hemdale Film Corporation produced the Vietnam War film Platoon. Featuring actors like Willem Dafoe, Charlie Sheen, and Johnny Depp, the movie would go on to be nominated for 8 Academy Awards and won 4, including Best Picture. It grossed $137.9 million on a budget of just $6 million. A video game adaptation of Platoon was released in 1988 for the NES. The game begins as a side-scroller, with the player needing to navigate a jungle in search of a cache of explosive that they then use to blow up a bridge. From here, the player enters a village where they find the supplies necessary to enter the level, the tunnels. In this stage, the player's perspective shifts to a first-person shooter reminiscent of Wolfenstein 3D. After escaping the tunnels, Stage 3 is a bunker defense, featuring the player gunning down enemies as they pop up. The final level is a third-person escape, with the soldier rushing through the jungle and overtaking a bunker occupied by a group sergeant. The game concludes with the soldier being taken away on a helicopter, presumably forever changed by the horrors he has witnessed and inflicted. But what if he didn't have to do any of that? Better yet, what if he didn't need to do anything at all? NES Cardinality is a speedrunner and Twitch streamer whose goal is to speedrun every NES game. To date, he's submitted to over 100 games, with one of these games being Platoon. A look at the Any% boards shows NES Cardinality having run a time of 8 minutes 15 seconds. While this is certainly a short speedrun, it's definitely longer than a second. Looking up the page a little though shows that there's a second category, Glitch%. Glitch% has 2 runs submitted to it, both with a time of 1 millisecond. In other words, much less than a second. But why is there a category faster than Any%? And how does it save so much time? Looking at the video hardly does anything to clear things up. It starts with a blue screen, only to skip immediately to the credits when the game boots up. However, the credits are heavily distorted, making it obvious just how strange things are. To understand what's happening, we need to break down how the NES loads games. The NES can only directly access 32 kilobytes of program code at a time. Games quickly became much larger than 32 kilobytes though. To get around this limitation, special chips were developed known as memory management controllers or mappers. These chips were added to cartridges and allowed the game to swap different chunks of program code, commonly referred to as banks, in and out of memory. The mapper Platoon uses is MMC1, which was developed by Nintendo and is the most widely used. Most NES games scatter related code and data across banks, but Platoon is unusual. Each bank is basically a self-contained mode or level. Bank 6 takes you to the title screen. Bank 5 houses the first level. The tunnels are stored in Bank 4. Bank 3 features the bunker defense, while Bank 2 is used for the final level. When players game over, they're taken to Bank 1. Finally, Bank 0 contains the ending and credits. In practice, the game tells MMC1 which bank to load, then jumps to memory address 8000 to start that section. However, this entire process hinges on cartridge pin 14. Pin 14 contains what's known as PRGRW and is what tells the cartridge whether the CPU is reading from ROM or writing to it. Normally, the NES CPU is only supposed to read code from the cartridge cartridge. It isn't supposed to write to ROM. The mapper chip pretends to be writable though, but rather than actually changing the ROM, MMC1 interprets those values as commands and changes banks accordingly. Critically, bank switching only works if the cartridge's pin 14 is hooked up. If pin 14 is broken, taped, or in any way disconnected, the mapper never sees any write signals. Since MMC1 isn't receiving any commands, it's unable to change banks, leaving the game to wherever it initially loads. The thing is though, MMC1 isn't supposed to guarantee which bank it starts in. The game's initial state is supposed to be random. It isn't uncommon for games to put reset codes at the end of every bank in case the mapper decides to boot into a random bank. For some reason though, Platoon consistently loads in bank 0, the very same bank that contains the ending of the game. This means that when pin 14 is disconnected, the game is forced to load the credits. This is also what causes the graphical errors. The game is unable to switch the graphical banks, causing it to load the wrong assets. Turning back to what happened to NES cardinality, research by a community member named Dweddit revealed that the most likely cause of the glitch was NES cardinality's pin 14 not being connected, potentially due to dirt. They theorized that this run could be recreated by placing tape over the pin to interrupt its connection. This was confirmed by Keikonen a few years later, who placed electrical tape over the pin, resulting in the same effect. Perhaps the most insane part of this trick though is that it's so fast it actually breaks speedrun.com. Since the game is loading into the credits, there's never a frame where the game isn't finished. In essence, it's a run of 0 frames. Speedrun.com has a limitation though, which doesn't allow runners to input times less than 1 millisecond. It is, as far as I know, the fastest speedrun of any game. But let's go back to Bedlam for a moment. Born in 1817, Richard Dadd was a notable painter of the Victorian age, who challenged the traditional structures of the art world through his rejection of the Royal Academy of Arts and creation of a group of artists known as the Clique. In 1942, Dadd embarked on a trip to the Middle East, during which his mental health began to deteriorate significantly. He started experiencing delusions and became convinced that he was being guided by the Egyptian god Osiris to wage war against the devil, who he believed was disguising himself as other people. Upon Dadd's return to England, his father took him on a trip to the countryside out of concern for his son's strange behavior. Sensing the devil in disguise, Richard drew a knife and killed his father. After being arrested in France, Dadd was returned to England and institutionalized in Bedlam. He was deemed to be criminally insane. Dadd spent 20 years at Bedlam. Despite his confinement, he continued to paint. His time in the asylum produced the Fairy Feller's Master Stroke, a painting which is widely considered to be his magnum opus. Having worked on it for 9 years, it demonstrates a unique, obsessive level of detail which characterized his art during this period. The story of Dadd is a testament to madness as a dedication so intense it breaks from the expected reality. It's the unwavering will to create a masterpiece over years of stagnation. This same defiant will is what defines a speedrunner's craft. The most compelling runs are those that refuse to accept the game's boundaries. When a game demands a specific line of progression, it's sending a calling card telling speedrunners exactly how the game should be broken. This is precisely the spirit that drove runners to completely destroy Super Paper Mario's most infamous challenge. Released in 2007 for the Nintendo Wii, Super Paper Mario blends platforming with light RPG mechanics, letting Mario and friends switch between 2D and 3D to solve puzzles and progress through story chapters. Alongside its main quest, the game also features several grueling optional combat arenas designed to push players to their limits. The Flipside Pit of 100 Trials, the Flopside Pit of 100 Trials, and the Samur Kingdom's 100 Duels. Of these 3 100-round endurance challenges, only the Flipside Pit is accessible early in the game. The Flopside Pit doesn't open until Flopside itself becomes available midway through the story, while the Samur Kingdom's Gauntlet begins in 6-1 and cannot be finished until after the game has been beaten. The Flipside Pit, by contrast, sits in the sub-basement of the hub town, tantalizingly close. In theory, nothing stops the player from finding it as soon as they reach Flipside, but in practice, 2 progression locks hold it back until midway through Chapter 2-1. First, Flipside itself expands gradually. Elevators between floors are inactive at the start and only power up as the story advances. The second is a near essential companion, or pixel, named Boomer. There are 2 ways to the sub-basement, both requiring Boomer. Taking the elevator down to the sub-basement, Boomer's needed to hit the pit switch from the ground. Alternatively, the pit can also be reached by navigating the Flipside outskirts, but a required pipe is blocked off by bricks that can only be destroyed by Boomer at this point in the game. Boomer doesn't join the party though until Chapter 2-1. Of course, speedrunners almost never play by Nintendo's rules, and began looking for ways to access the Flipside Pit earlier. It was discovered that by crouching and jumping into the corner of the bricks, it's possible to clip inside of them and enter the pipe. Suddenly, by taking the outskirts route, the mandatory Boomer was no longer needed. While this made it so the pit could be accessed before Chapter 2.1, it still couldn't be reached before finishing Chapter 1. This is due to the outskirts being locked behind a gate on the first floor of Flipside. The key to this gate is only given to the player during an interaction with the wizard Merlin after the first chapter is finished. While an early means of unlocking the gate has never been found, runners eventually crack the route wide open. Within Merlin's house, it's possible to clip into the book on the table while in 3D. This book can be used to push Mario through the wall of the house, where he can then walk along the seam of the map and around the fence, accessing the outskirts. Unfortunately, this trick was nothing short of nightmarish. Super Paper Mario's movement is non-deterministic. This means that even if a runner performs the same inputs in the same position, they still will get different results, resulting in pseudo-RNG torment. This is compounded by runners needing to hit 3 frame-perfect inputs in a row. On top of all of this, the outside of Merlin's house remains unloaded, meaning that players are doing the movement entirely in the dark. But still, it worked. Against all odds, runners had forced open a path to the Flipside pit earlier than Nintendo ever intended. The only requirement now was the ability to flip the camera to 3D. This is unlocked midway through level 1-1, allowing the Flipside pit to be reached over 20 minutes faster than going to 2-1 and unlocking Boomer. Being able to reach the Flipside pit so early in the game severely limits the player's options. The only character unlocked is Mario, with his only abilities being his basic jump, turning 3D, and using items. In the pit, players must defeat successive floors of enemies to progress, with an intermission every 10 floors, and then culminating in a boss fight on the 100th floor. Each room has a predetermined enemy composition, with one of these mobs holding a key to the next floor. As such, runners can get lucky and have the key drop after killing a single enemy. While this is enough to defeat most enemies, there are a few nearly impossible ones. For instance, Mario can't jump on enemies with spikes. This is a problem in rooms like floor 21. This stage contains 6 spinies and no other enemies. Since Mario's base moveset lacks any means of damaging them, it requires using items such as a shell shock. By manipulating the spinies to ground level and going into 3D, Mario can then use the item to defeat the enemies and get the key. There are other enemies that can be damaged by Mario jumping on them, but they also have high defense stats. The Chain Chomp on floor 25 has 4 defense. This means that Mario needs to have at least 5 strength for the Chain Chomp to take any damage. Mario's strength increases with his level. Every time Mario defeats an enemy, he gains points. Mario's health increases on each square number multiplied by 10,000, and his strength goes up each pronic number times 10,000. This means that in order to have an attack power of 5, Mario's score needs to be at least 200,000, which isn't possible to reach solely from pit enemies prior to floor 25. However, there are some items that increase Mario's strength. By using either a hot sauce or a mighty tonic, Mario's strength is temporarily doubled. This means that in order to do at least 5 damage, Mario needs his strength to be at least 3. The breakthrough point of 60,000 points is barely achievable from pit combat alone, but this also means it's possible to get too lucky on early key drops that stunts point accumulation. The most problematic floors by far though are 13, 15, and 84. 13 and 15 contain Schlurps, while 84 features their upgraded variant, Schlorps. Schlurps and Schlorps can only be damaged using the Pixel Boomer, which, it goes without saying, isn't an option. While each of these floors have enemies other than Schlurps and Schlorps, there's a chance that the key spawns inside an enemy Mario literally cannot damage. When this happens, the run is effectively soft-locked. In lieu of Boomer, the only potential backup is using a catch card. Catch cards are a rare drop that can defeat nearly every enemy in the game. The issue is, they can only be used on a single enemy, and even then, success is not guaranteed. Every time Mario drops into one of these floors, runners are gambling for a good outcome. Even worse though, floor 84 doesn't just pose a problem, it's a wall. Without items, Mario literally cannot win. While floor 13 has bald clefts and floor 15 has boomboxers, 84's companion to Schlorps is 4 Spanias, which also can't be damaged by jumping. This means that when runners reach 84, it's guaranteed that at least one item will be used. To twist the knife even further, Schlurps are more resistant to catch cards than Schlurps, making a last chance save even less likely. Although items are dropped by enemies in the pit, it's too inconsistent and unpredictable to rely too heavily on them for routing purposes. This makes the entire run revolve around the items you carry in. The current world record route enters with 3 shell shocks and 7 ice storms. Ice storms damage all enemies on screen, dealing 8 damage and 4 hits, costing 40 coins each. Getting those coins requires another exploit. By clipping through a wall in Flipside Basement 2, runners reach an item that permanently increases Mario's health by 5. This buff can be sold for 400 coins, which can in turn be used to buy the necessary items. The biggest problem with this route is that the shop is on one side of the gate while the health buff is on the other, meaning the player needs to get around the gate twice. Given the precision and inconsistency of Merlin house clip, this was simply not a viable option. However, an alternative means of getting around the gate was found, which not only was easier, but also faster. Normally, when Mario's in 2D, he's unable to move in the Z-axis. However, by changing into 3D, walking off a ledge, and changing back into 2D, Mario enters into an animation where he's flapping his arms. It's then possible to move along the Z-axis by jumping while holding up or down. This led to a breakthrough on top of Flipside Tower. By falling through a tiny gap in the collision geometry along the tower's back wall, Mario drops to the same seam of the map Merlin house clip used, with the added benefit of the level being now loaded in. This is due to 2D Mario's collision being more like a line rather than a true 3D object, allowing him to squeeze through holes in the map. This trick is so much easier than Merlin house clip that runners are able to consistently perform it twice in runs, allowing them to add selling the health boost to the route. All that was left for Pixel's Pit was beating the final boss. At the end of the 100 trials, Racktail towers overhead. His antenna, the only means of damaging him, is far too high to jump on. The designers never meant Mario to reach it unaided. Normally, players are expected to use the pixel throw to pick up the small Racco enemies and throw them at the antenna. Of course, this isn't an option when running pixelless. This is where the ice storms become indispensable. Since Racktail is based around number of hits rather than the amount of damage, using 3 ice storms pushes the fight into the next phase. Although Mario is supposed to fall off Racktail's back during this transition, it's possible to jump from the end of his tail and back onto his head. By transitioning to 3D, then back to 2D near the end of the tail, Mario will be able to jump out of his flapping animation and onto the antenna. This is rather precise though, as Racktail is constantly oscillating up and down on a set cycle. While this is easy enough to account for when using ice storms, it is a more complex process when jumping on the antenna. If the cycle timing is off, it's nice to shake the Wii remote to perform a stylish animation to delay the fight long enough to change the position in the cycle. When the fight is over, a chest spawns. Mario opens it and, after 100 floors of impossible odds, finally adds a pixel to his party. But not everyone escapes loneliness. The Longing is among the most unique games ever released. It serves as a commentary on loneliness, waiting, and the passage of time. Players control the Shade, a small, isolated creature tasked by its king to wait in a dark underground kingdom until the king awakens. The game is built around a real-time 400-day countdown, which continues to run even when the game is closed. The gameplay is centered on how the player will spend the time waiting. There are 5 possible endings to The Longing, with the secret ending easily being the hardest to find. Known as the Wonder ending, the Shade needs to collect 3 crystals in order to unlock it. The deceptively brief criteria obscures the complexity of obtaining the Wonder. The game is built around the passage of time, meaning that certain events can only be completed at a certain point in the day, or after some amount of time has passed. The run starts with the Shade in its room. Runners begin by making their way to the Kingdom exit door. This room contains a door which takes 2 hours to open, making it advantageous to start the process as soon as possible. After the door opening process begins, the Shade picks up a piece to a music instrument and leaves the room. Back in the map room, runners go to the left and proceed along a hidden path in the moss room where another piece of the instrument is found. Turning around now, the final part of the instrument is at the bottom of the stairs. Once the instrument has been reassembled, the Shade returns home to practice. The instrument is easily the most important tool in the run. It's the most consistent means of passing time. With the game being built around a real-world 400-day clock, being able to efficiently speed up the passage of time is essential to progression. Every time the Shade plays, 10 minutes pass. Since runners need the Kingdom exit door to finish opening, 10 symphonies are played to pass 100 minutes. Combined with the time spent navigating the caves and collecting the parts of the instrument, the door will open by the time the player arrives. Proceeding through the door, the Shade enters a dark and cold cave. Climbing further up, the player reaches a boulder that needs to be moved in order to continue going higher. Pushing this boulder into place takes over a minute. Continuing along, the Shade befriends a spider. After making some interior design recommendations, the Shade sets off towards the mines, while the spider begins building a new web. Now in the mines, the Shade must wait atop a splintering post used to prop up a lower mine shaft. After sitting there for 5 minutes, the beam gives out, allowing the Shade to access the lower tunnel. Down here, the player finds a medic, which can be used for gathering materials. At this point, the player must return home and play the instrument until the timer reads around 398 days, 11 hours, and 50 minutes, or roughly 33.5 hours have passed. By this point, the shade can return to its spider friend and climb up its new web. Going down the tunnel leads to a wall which can be mined, eventually revealing a green mushroom. This mushroom can be planted close to a wall on the other side of a nearby tunnel, which also must first be mined out. Another pink mushroom must also be planted closer to the wall cliff. From here, the shade needs to wait for both to grow, so he returns home and plays his instrument until the timer reads approximately 397 days, 21 hours, and 50 minutes, before returning to the now fully grown mushrooms. Using the mushrooms to reach the higher ledge, the shade is now approaching the end of any percent. If he continues all the way down this tunnel, he'll arrive at a cliff and be faced with the option to jump off and release himself from the longing. The secret ending requires the player to make a different choice though. After climbing the mushroom, instead of going all the way to the cliff, the player must turn up a secret path after around 5 minutes of walking. Proceeding down this path for another minute leads the player face to face with angst. Here, the shade must not move for around 10 minutes, otherwise the angst will approach the shade and send him back to his home. After 10 minutes, the shade will begin speaking with himself. Choosing the correct dialogue options will give the player the option to have the shade close his eyes. This allows the player to pass the angst and continue down the tunnel. After about 6 minutes, the player must turn down a fork in the road, which eventually leads to the secret tower. Within this tower, there's a pink crystal, which is one of the 3 crystals needed to complete the secret ending. Further up the tower is a key that's outside of the shade's reach. In order to obtain this key, it's necessary to enter the tower before the timer reads 21 hours. Soon after it ticks below this mark, a bird can be seen flying in the background, with it landing in the nest after a little under 10 minutes. This somehow causes the key to fall after a few seconds. Now, the longing is almost entirely a waiting game. There are 2 objectives left, the yellow and green crystals. The yellow crystal is located within a secret room which spawns at one of 9 locations at each in-game midnight and stays there for 30 minutes. The key from the tower is needed to open the door to the secret room and won't even appear within the first 7 days of a playthrough. Given how slowly the shade moves, it's highly inefficient to check each of these doors to find the right one. Luckily, due to the length of the speedrun, the community agreed to allow segmented runs. This means that runners don't need to complete everything in a single playthrough, but rather can take breaks and continue the same run later on. The one stipulation is that the timer can only be paused in 2 spots, within the secret door and the Hall of Eternity. Within the hall, the game's timer pauses, even when the game is closed. Along the way to the hall are several spots where the secret door can appear, making the most efficient option for entering the door to be leaving the shade's home around midnight, and hoping one of the spots along the way to the Hall of Eternity has the door. Inside of the door is the yellow crystal, as well as several items which increase the speed the time passes while in the shade's home. There's one issue with collecting them though. The shade can only be within the room for about 30 seconds before he becomes trapped in there until midnight of the next day. Collecting the additional items doesn't leave the shade with enough time to escape. Had the community not agreed that runs could be paused in this room, any run that got trapped in here would instantly be lost. Due to this, stopping a run in the secret room is optimal since it doesn't pause the timer like the Hall of Eternity does. This means that a day passes while the runner isn't even playing the game that doesn't get included in the runtime. With the yellow crystal collected, all that's left is the green crystal. This is easily the most particular of the 3, with it only spawning on the shade's birthday. Since this takes a year to pass in-game, it's worth looking at how the instrument works. The instrument can play 4 notes. Once each of these 4 notes have been performed in order, 10 minutes pass. Players can either use the D-pad on a controller or their mouse if they like making bad decisions. In order to use the mouse, the runner needs to click through 4 sections of the screen, each corresponding to a different note. While the D-pad is significantly faster, there's a unique problem when playing the game on Steam, as the D-pad doesn't work properly. A workaround was found by the world record holder Rifre. By placing the mouse in the zone for note 2, it's possible to play the instrument by repeating the combination of D-pad right, move left analog stick, D-pad down, D-pad left. Just how long does it take though? 365 days is made up of 525,600 minutes. With each of it taking 4 notes to pass 10 minutes, each note optimally saves 2.5 minutes. This means that it takes 210,240 inputs to pass. The longing runs at 60 frames per second. If one input were to be performed every frame, it'd take nearly an hour to pass the time. Some people can press a button over 15 times a second, which means this would still take nearly 4 hours. Even this is a rosy perspective though, as 15 inputs a second is based on mashing a single button. Alternating between the 4 inputs required by the longing would significantly slow things down, with anything under 10 hours being highly ambitious without rebinding keys. At least 2 weeks prior to the Shade's birthday, it's necessary to go over the waterfall where the green crystal is. This starts a timer for moss to grow. This moss is used to cushion the Shade's fall when he jumps down. Runners must be sitting in the water when the timer hits 35 days. At this point, the green crystal will surface up from the water, with it quickly rising out from the Shade's reach if it isn't grabbed within a few seconds. With the last crystal collected, all that's left is returning to the Shade's home. Placing all 3 crystals on top of each other creates the Wonder, which the Shade can walk through and find a happier life. Ultimately, the speedrun for the Wonder ending in The Longing is a testament to the community's willingness to commit to the utterly insane. The reliance on convoluted controller workarounds, the strategic use of getting trapped for a day to pause a run, and the sheer volume of inputs required reveals a challenge that's less about traditional gameplay and more a bizarre, optimized ritual against the tyranny of real-time itself. Where the game's design encourages quiet contemplation and acceptance, the speedrun imposes a grueling schedule of calendar-perfect timing and staggering repetition, proving that even a 400-day sentence can be conquered through sheer, borderline, maniacal dedication. In the end, the line between fear and fascination is thin. The walls of the asylum once held the horrors of losing control. Conversely, speedrunning demonstrates a control so absolute, it resembles madness in its own right. It's a craft that demands a dedication so intense, it breaks from the expected. What makes speedrunning so compelling isn't just the speed. It's a spectacle of the human spirit pushing beyond conventional limits. A pursuit of perfection that, to the outside world, will always look a little insane.